I want to do something different today. I haven't done a video on this topic, but maybe I have been doing the thing all along. That is on translation, as is written in the title. Now, it will be a kind of quick recapitulation of what you have studied. I mean, I'm particularly addressing students only for some immediate purpose, so I will not go into deep details, but then the needful will be there. First of all, translation literally means carrying across. Trans, across, and then latio, both Latin, carrying across. From that, the word translation has come. In other words, expressing the meaning of some sentence, some phrase in one language in another language. Now, the very phrase in other words that I have used implies translation. Rather, it means translation. But then, once we have said this, then there are two things at place here. There are two languages and two texts. By text, you need not understand textbooks, but some kind of message, verbal artifact, let us say, if we can use the term. So, say something is said in English, you will translate it into Hindi or vice versa. So, these two things are technically called source language and target language. The one from which you will translate is the source language, and to which it is translated is the target language. Similarly, the texts are called source text and target text. Now, what was emphasized earlier was that earlier means in translation theory. Earlier, ever since translation theory had been studied, but I am not saying in translation proper, in translation theory. Initially, it was said that fidelity to the original is the most important thing. So, as much as you can, the meaning of the original thing must be expressed verbatim, word for word, in the translated one also. So, this has given rise to couple of challenges also, because we know that now more than ever that languages are culture specific. They are not mere signs, signifier, signified, etc., which emphasizes on the verbal nature of the thing, but then culture specific. So there are certain things which actually are untranslatable. They cannot be translated. So you have to give further interpretation. Of course, by untranslatability, I mean direct translation. Take this for instance. A very important ritual with Hindus, Annaprashan or Annaprasanam, when the child is first given solid food around 6 months. What will be the English translation? Because it does not exist in Judo Christian culture, that system itself is not there. So there are two types of thing done. Either you write Annaprasana when you translate a text and give a note, or some new words that have been coined. These look in a very confusing. So Annaprashan is called rice ceremony. Now a British person who is not in touch with Indian ethos while reading a novel, by rice ceremony he might imagine or she might imagine something related to throwing of rices here and there and people making fun. So rice ceremony is risky. Similarly, Upanayanam, then sacred thread ceremony or thread ceremony. Again, there are other aspects also. Honeymoon, for example, honeymoon was not there in Indian culture. Now, I am not a purist. I am not saying that there should not be honeymoons. I mean, it's a matter of personal choice, but it's not there. So we don't have any word. But then during the colonial encounter, when we accepted the modes, some new words were formed. So in Bangla, Madhu Chandrima, from that honeymoon, it is not an original Bengali or Sanskrit word, because precisely the practice was not there. In our cases, the marriages are family centric, whereas the basic idea of honeymoon is again seclusion, isolation for a newly married couple, which is very important, especially in the present context. Not right now, now Corona is there, but then, because now we are more and more individualistic. So honeymoon fits in more there. So on and so forth. So that is why it is very difficult to always translate word for word. So from that to theories, that is, some people say that there should be word for word translation, and some say that no, sense for sense. The original sense carry, I mean, which is there in the original text, that should be carried. So, in that sense, the cultural equivalent, I'm not sure, of Annaprasana would be in the Judo, I mean, Christian tradition would be baptism. Yeah, Judo Christian tradition, baptism would be the. Perhaps, I'm not sure. But then again, to make word for word translation, you have to either write rice ceremony or Annaprasana or give a note. Look at the kinship terms, for example. As Indians, our kinship terms are much more varied because we possibly recognize individually a much wider spectrum of people. So we have individual terms for mother's brother, father's brother. Then again, if you are, say, Bengali, then father's elder brother and then younger brother. They have different terms, Jethu and Kaku. From Sanskrit again, Jeshtatat, Khudratat, Khullotat, etc. All the descendants of Sanskrit has these. I don't know about the Dravidian language, but in English you have only uncle. So you don't understand. So we use in Indian English sometimes maternal uncle, paternal uncle. That looks again awkward because that is not very English or maybe dated English. So say wives, again wives, or say wife, foreign wife, husband's maternal uncle. Again a different name. Mama Shushur we call in Bangla. So how will you translate Mama Shushur in English? So you have to write if you are translating or that, say, my wife's uncle, again which uncle, maternal or paternal, because for them it doesn't matter that so just uncle or like cousin, but we specify different types of cousins, whether from the father's side or mother's side, quote unquote. Now these are some of the problems that I am telling you, not to create a kind of un you know kind of very fixed border between cultures, but to say that cultures are different, which makes translation difficult. But as I said, the modern trend in literature and theory is to go for sense translation. However, it does not apply to, again, I find this aspect lacking in most books of translation. They talk about translation, but they presume that they are only talking about literary translation, or they rather assume that literary translation is the only kind of translation. There are certain things like physics, chemistry, mathematics, legal documents, where actually it is very important to be literal, literally true. Of course, sense must be there, but literal meaning must be carried out. So while we say sense for sense, we encourage creativity, which is good in literary translation, but so far as translation of science things are concerned, it may not be good. Suppose someone is translating Principia Mathematica by that famous scientist and start writing a story in between that how Newton, for example, was very much fond of an elephant, and then how he reared, and that would be a very fantastic thing if you are making literal translation, rather literary translation. But it will be a bad thing for the one who wants to read Principia Mathematica, because that's not required there. So I just, this is my addition actually. While you read translation books, you may not encounter this. I have not. They always, as I said, sermonize or theorize, keeping only literary translations at the background. But again, I repeat, there are many registers, science, mathematics, law, etc., where if you are creative, then you will jeopardize many things. But then again, all words may not have equivalent. Anyway, so sense for sense and word for word, these are the broadly two kinds of translation. So the sense for sense translation leads us to another thing which is called transcreation. Transcreation, that is translating something not fully in fully in imitation of the original, but adding new things. That way, all the classical works of India that were translated during the Middle Ages or the medieval times. I'm using these words for want of better word only. Otherwise, these are very controversial term, I believe. Ancient, medieval, etc. Anyway, so just as period marker, I am using these terms without any kind of bias against any. But anyway, all the translations that took place in the Middle Ages of our classic texts are transcreations basically. That is why Valmiki's Ramayana has been translated very differently by Tulsidas. He has just taken the main story, nothing else. That also in a very different way. And then in Bangla Krittibashi Ramayana, that also is very different. In Bangla, in fact, we have more translations, more than one, but only Krittibashi is well known. A lady also translated the Ramayana, Chandravati. Then there are Adbhut Ramayana and all. Ramayana was probably the most translated text in the Middle Ages of the classical texts or classic texts. So they are very different. So that is why they are all transcreations, not translations. Now I will come to another aspect. For that I had to look for, I wanted to show you some books, but it is not there. Maybe I will just, later I will show, I will get them in a minute maybe. So that brings us to again some important aspect of translation, technical aspect, three types of translation, which were enumerated by Roma Jakobson, the Russian linguist, and then around I think 1959. And these are very important, especially for students. So, what are the three types of translation? Jakobson said, and we more or less agree, that these are intralingual, interlingual, and intersemiotic. Interlingual, or the second one, we understand. In fact, that is what is proper translation, quote unquote. We have discussed that only all along, from one language to another language. Now, what is intralingual? Intra means within. So within a language you can translate a text. Now how is it possible? Okay, one thing is that you reword, you paraphrase, then it is a kind of translation, but there are more important things than that. So that's why I will just get the book, I'm sorry, in a minute. Now these are the examples I wanted to show. So this is the new KJV. I think whoever has studied English literature does not need to be told what is the KJV, King James Version of the Bible, which was prepared by a team of scholars under the leadership of the Bishop Lancelot Andrews. So Eliot has an essay for Lancelot Andrews now, which is an important essay so far as Eliot's ideological kind of explanation is concerned. Now this is the New King James Version. New. That is, this is actually not a translation again from the Hebrew Bible or the Latin Bible, Old and New Testaments. Those are there. Good News Bible and they have directly translated. But this is rather a translation from the, I think, 16th century, 17th century translation, King James Bible, because that has become so dated. I mean, that even English people mostly do not understand those words. So that is why they had to translate it so that the spirit of the King James Bible, which is a classic in itself, remains, but at the same time, contemporary people understand. So the translation is from English to English. So this can be a very good example of, intralingual translation within the same language. I would give another Indian example in my language, Bangla. In the same medieval age, a very important text was Chaitanya Charitamrita by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, which is the biography and theology of Chaitanya combined. He was not an eyewitness to Chaitanya's life, but he wrote, and it became such a celebrated work that it was from Bangla then even translated to Sanskrit also, whereas generally we translate from Sanskrit to Bangla and other languages, but Charitamrita was such a text which had to be translated in the reverse so that the Pandits also can understand. I have seen in Maharashtra, for example, people of Varkari Sampradaya, they hold it in very high esteem and elsewhere also. Anyway, in recent years, now what has happened is the language of Chaitanya Charitamrita, like of the King James Bible is also dated. It was written in the, I think, early 17th century. It is difficult to date now, but then it is full of words which are now obsolete in Bangla, and on top of it there are a lot of Hindi words because he stayed in the Hindi belt, quote unquote. So jaise, kaise, taise, all these words are there, which, and then the way it is written in Bengali pronunciation, it is not possible to understand that it's something Hindi. So many Bengali people read it like joiche, koiche, toiche, but it's not like jaise, kaise, taise, like that. There are many other things. So, but then that is a very important text, a must study for those interested in Indian theology of the Middle Ages, and also people who study Bangla literature formally, but then mostly they do not understand. So, in recent years, couple of translations of Chaitanya Charitamrita to modern Bangla have been attempted, not only one. So this one is by Vishwabharati professor Omitra Sudan Bhattacharya. So this is a compressed translation of the 17th century, early 17th century Bangla text into Bangla itself. So these two, one Western, one Eastern, I would say, because we have to take care of both, as Rajrao said in his introduction to Kantapura. So these are examples actually of intralingual translation. Now the third one is intersemiotic. Now that is slightly, the term is slightly difficult for those who are new, but basically the matter is simple. Now Roma Jakobson, like Rolla Barth and others, they were basically into semiotics, study of signs. As I said in the beginning, a language was a verbal sign. But the language is not the only sign system through which we express ourselves. There are other sign systems. Dance, music, today television, when all kinds of media, advertisements, so many things. So when you translate one particular text from its original medium, verbal medium, to an entirely different medium, that will be an example of intersemiotic translation. Let me give an example. Many of you must have watched the film Makbul, which is what you call adaptation of Macbeth. But basically, this is in a way intersemiotic translation. That is, the original Macbeth is in text form, play text. When you make it into a film or any film of all Shakespeare things, these are, for example, intersemiotic translations. Basically, Satyajit Ray's Pather Pachali, I'm sorry if people, find it rather disagreeable, but basically this is intersemiotic translation. It, of course, he is a great person that cannot be denied, far far greater than most of us, Satyajit Ray. But then the success was also dependent on the original text, which was written by Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay. Often we forget that Pather Pachali, which has become possibly the most important movie that India has made, going by critical perception, and one of the most important in world cinema. But then it is associated with Ray. Few people remember that it is actually an intersemiotic translation of a text written by Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay, Pather Pachali. Now, it is almost, I am just looking at the timer, 18 minutes. It will take so long to upload, and the purpose may not be served, immediate purpose for some. Just one thing, loss and gain in translation. So when you translate from one language to another language, because they are different, because cultures are different, definitely the same cannot be reproduced. So there would be losses. Again, the quote unquote purists who belong to earlier generations always lamented about the losses. There's such a huge loss. They're purists. Our culture is in great crisis, and as if culture is something which continues unchanged forever. So whenever you do something new, these purists are there. So those people always find loss in translation, but they do not understand. For example, they will read Jibanananda Das's poems translated. No, it is not like Jibanananda Das. So how can a translation be like that? It is a translation. But at least something is being given for those who cannot read Bangla, Jibanananda in Bangla. Then it may interest one, and then they may come back. So that is the gain aspect of translation. This is just an example. There are many other examples. New words, which of course I gave some awkward examples like rice ceremony, thread ceremony, Mothu Chandrima, but there are many things. Good things happen. Words we get enriched. I mean, our individual languages, especially into which translations are made, is always enriched by all acts of good translations. So we should not focus only on the loss in translation but gain in translation also. The same with colonialism. That's why post colonialism is not basically a nativist rejection of everything that the empire or due to empire we had. At the same time, it is not a celebration like Nirotsi did, that whatever is good in us came through the empire only, British Empire. That is absolutely mindless statement. And then definitely he did it to provoke people. He wanted fame through controversy often. Nirotsi, he was a great scholar though. But at the same time, that cannot be true. But yes, it was a kind of both gain and loss. In this regard, I remember a very epic statement given by Prafulla Chandra Kaur, one of my not direct teachers, but whom many of us, I mean those who know him, admire and respect. So he, in this context, had once says that the Bengal and the Bengalis, I mean Bengal and the Bengalis are the greatest beneficiaries as well as the greatest victims of colonialism or colonization. So you can judge, because I'm a Bengali. So based on what I'm doing all these days in this channel, maybe you can contrast it or compare with Prafullo Chandrakara's statement. Thank you very much. We'll be back again with some other thing.